All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Derek, thank you for being with us, buddy. You and I have known each other a long time. We've been trying to get the cartels designated as foreign terrorist organizations for some time. Our two organizations work together very well. Would you tell the folks a little bit about what you did with DEA SOD, kind of what that program is and what you were in charge of?
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, Special Operations Division is part of DEA. It's located in Northern Virginia. It's a synchronization center to pull together operations going after some of the biggest transnational organized crime threats. Obviously, since the threats from the Mexican cartels have been escalating over the last many years, DEA Special Operations Division has been focused in on the Mexican cartels and working with our state and local counterparts around the country, along with our federal counterparts, to kind of connect the dots of the network. So the whole operation is focused on pulling together the intelligence to try to really understand the magnitude of the network and then try to help the field operations people develop evidence to charge the leadership of the cartel and other transnational crime organizations with the violations of federal, crimes and state and local crimes as well.
Yeah, it's just a fantastic program that DEA has, and we work together very well. Our state fusion center and y'all, especially with border crimes and going after the Zetas, you guys always did amazing work. As you know, Derek, I'm frustrated as hell, man, with what we're seeing now. President AMLO has come out and announced that conversations he has had privately with President Biden is that they're talking about giving $4 billion to Central America. And it's basically the Meridia Initiative all over again, which you and I work extensively. Can you talk a little bit about that, what you remember about it, what it did, and really some of the challenges? And, it's a policy issue. And for me, it's a failed policy issue.
Right. So before we get to that discussion, it's very interesting that the President of the United States and the President of Mexico have a conversation, and we haven't heard anything in the news media about the national security threats of the cartels that are killing Americans at unprecedented levels. So that's my first concern when I hear about these meetings between two international leaders, right? So the Meridia Initiative, back in the old days, they tried to copy what we did in Plan Colombia, which happened to be very successful. And it's a security agreement between the United States and Mexico back in those days, and of course, the countries in Central America, to trying to focus in on the transnational crime threats and specifically the drug trafficking threats. So the idea was the U.S. could provide substantial sums of money to these countries, and they could do a much better job at curbing this massive drug crisis. Well, obviously, Jason, as you and I both know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that it's been a monumental failure in many ways. Now, don't get me wrong, there has been some successes. Most recently, there was a big time press release and an indictment released out of the US regarding MS-13. So there's been some really good cooperation with the El Salvadorians, working with the United States to put together a massive, unprecedented indictment against some of the savages of MS-13. But for the most part, it's a political policy statement, and we're just throwing away our money to several countries that are very corrupt. So the money is not getting to the problems, right? It's the corrupt politicians that are making fortune off these initiatives, right? So it's a mess, really, it is. Because if you look at the drug crisis, it's getting worse. It's not getting better. So obviously we have to change what we're doing. We can't keep doing the same old things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole point of it was to reduce violence and to reduce overdose deaths in the United States and to combat transnational crime. But when we look at the data, I mean, we were looking at it pretty closely yesterday. And I'll tell you, under the Meridia Initiative, when it started in 2007, and in all fairness, under the Bush administration and continued under the Obama administration, when we look at the data, I mean, the overdose deaths in the United States, Derek, they just skyrocketed.
Right. I mean, you're looking at the CDC's latest stats through May of 2020, 81,000 dead. That's 210 a day that have died. And all the experts are reporting that the majority of these fatalities are from fentanyl. And I saw a coroner's report out of Franklin County, Ohio, where through the first 6 months in 2020, 85% of the deaths, right, were attributed to fentanyl. And to me, that's super alarming because the fentanyl is coming from labs in China and also directly from the cartels in Mexico, who now have started their own production processes in Mexico because they recognize the value and the amount of profit they can make from mixing fentanyl in with these other drugs. And then if you look at just the numbers on methamphetamine, Jason, and you can see like the death rates now are escalating from methamphetamine. You see seizures that we've never seen in the history of the country over the last 6 months. The amount of methamphetamines that have been seized, it's mind-boggling. Like 3,000, pounds in California, another 2,000 pounds in California. Atlanta had, 2,000 pounds earlier in the year, another 1,800 pounds. So every week it seems like we're seizing these mass amounts of methamphetamine. But one thing I always like to highlight, Jason, is that the chemicals to produce the methamphetamine in the Mexican cartel super labs, the industrial sized labs, the chemicals are coming from China. So China is actually the ones helping facilitate all the escalation in the drug crisis. And the cartels are the ones making billions. So we have the perfect storm brewing right now. But ultimately, what matters most to me is the amount of Americans that are dying and the families that are being destroyed. And that's the problem. We're not really focused in on that. And that's the government's number one job, protect the American public. And that's not happening.
Well, let me ask you this too. When we look at the violent deaths in Mexico, mostly caused by the Mexican cartels, and the violence that has happened across that entire country, not just regional, the way I really remember it back in 2009, when the Zetas really started their just hyper violence along the southwest border here with Texas. If you look today, we're talking since 2007 at the beginning of this Meridian Initiative, 264,000 deaths in Mexico. So
right.
It hasn't helped Mexico by giving them this money. It was 3.1 billion, if I remember correctly.
Well, Jason, couple of things about the statistics. Number one, we can never forget that in Mexico, the amount of disappearances is through the roof. So they're not even classifying those disappearances as murders, right? And it's deliberate because they don't want to hurt tourism, right? So in Mexico, you have like situations like the famous story that was reported with the stew maker, right? Where he's taking hundreds of people, humans, and dumping them in acid. And all they find is bones, right? And so there's so many people disappearing in Mexico, the numbers would be through the roof in regards to murders, right? So there's another aspect of that, and you're exactly right. As far as I know, in 2020, the murder rate in Mexico is off the charts once again, okay? Like 35,000 plus, right? And if you look at the rates over the last several years, it's just escalating. So what we're doing is not working. And clearly, President AMLO's hugs for thugs policy is not working, right? You saw what happened last year when they captured Chapo Guzman's son and they let him go after they were shooting up the entire, neighborhoods over there. It was insane. And so we have a crisis, and now they're heading our way, and they'll be set up all over our country. They're already in most of the cities in America operating their drug operations. So violence is going to continue to escalate. The drug trafficking business is going to flourish, and unfortunately, more people will die.
Now, tell me this, and tell me what your thoughts are. I have been hypercritical against the U.S. State Department's actions with Meridian, Mexico. Some of the success that they claim is that because they've instilled the rule of law, very similar to what we have here in the United States, where you develop probable cause, you then go to a judge and a magistrate, then from there you go out. And that sounds good in theory. But I also remember the days when we were sharing intelligence real time with U.S. intelligence agencies, with DEA, SOD, and your team, to drive operations with SAMAR to go after the capos and to go after the organizations to degrade them. And now what we see looking at the policies, yes, you have a rule of law from Meridia that's been established, but look at the conviction rate of homicides in Mexico. In 2020, it's 2%. Nothing has changed. They just put a facade on it. And the other thing to that is that tactically, relationships and sharing information between our two countries to drive operations, hell, we haven't arrested any capos in 2020 except El Mato, and that only reason they went after him is because he was stealing all the oil and money from Mexico. Am I wrong on that?
No, you're not wrong, but we got to go back and just talk about the corruption for a second, right? So corruption is driving a lot of this escalating business, right? And the violence, right? So these corrupt government officials, right, at the highest levels of the Mexican government. So let's talk about Cienfuegos, right? The former Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Army, right? He was arrested by the DEA in California pursuant to an indictment in the Eastern District of New York. He was later released and sent back to Mexico. Mexico reviewed the case that the U.S. had, and they decided he was totally exonerated. And now the Mexican president has the nerve to go onto the news and talk about how the DEA and the U.S. fabricated the evidence against this corrupt government official. But it doesn't stop there. You look at last year with the arrest of Garcia Luna, the head of public security for Mexico, right? These are high-level officials that were getting significant payoffs from the cartels to give them protection. So for many years, when I was the head of the SOD operation, we had operation after operation planned to go after Chapo Guzman and other high-value targets. And every time we got close, Chapo just disappeared like Houdini, right? And it's because he was getting tipped off, right? But then when we finally got Chapo, it was because we used the CMAR, the Mexican Marines, right? Just like our Marines and our Navy, SEALs, right? They went out and they were all business and they were out to do the job. When President AMLO got on board, he kind of curtailed their ability to go after these high value targets, right? So instead of keeping the pressure on, because we were making some headway, getting some kingpins extradited, they actually killed several high level kingpins in firefights. And there were so many high value targets arrested prior to AMLO, but then it all kind of slowed down. And it's like what you're talking about. So there's not cooperation. And not only is the cooperation going downhill, now they just passed this law, which is going to prevent the DEA and other foreign agents from working cooperatively with the Mexican government on these cases, on these high value targets. So they put in some really strict protocols and really bureaucratic rules on providing information, all information. And the only ones that are going to benefit from this new law are the corrupt government officials, the Chinese organized crime, and the Mexican cartels. So the State Department politics are just not working, right? When are we going to realize that, it sounds good, it looks good, it may smell good, but the action, the results is a failure. When you look across the board and you look at the end of the day, what's happening in America? There's more drugs coming from Mexico. There's more deaths. There's more violence. So what's going on? We have to regroup and change the strategy. And throwing money at it is not going to help.
And the data proves that. I mean, it's not a perception. It's just the facts. Data shows more Mexican citizens and people and migrants traveling through Mexico to get to the United States are being killed in Mexico right now under the processes and policies of not going after the capos, but compared to when we were doing that in the old days. And then and at the same time, look at the overdose deaths in the United States. I mean, the data shows that the policy did not work and what they're doing isn't working. So here we go, we're going to repeat it. What is driving
repeat
this?
It with more money. And now we have a situation where they're stopping the construction of the border wall. So that's another national security issue that we're all going to be, living with over the next several months and several years. As all these people come into the country, we have no idea who's coming into the country. That's the other issue.
Yeah, it's a real mess. You know, Derek, I want to thank you for coming on today and telling the folks what's really happening. You and I both know. And let me just ask you this one last question. Why is it that this information hasn't been getting out to the American people? Where is the breakdown about how can we be at this level of an epidemic in overdose? I mean, we've never been here as a nation. It is truly a national crisis. You don't see it on the news. Why is our government not discussing this and telling the American people just how bad it really is, and that these policies, you know, that's really the cusp of it. The U.S. policies aren't working. Where is the failure there? Is it at DOJ? Is it within the government agencies of FBI and DEA and others? Where
Well, it's a failure. There's a lot of blame to go around, Jason. So number one, the mainstream media is not being honest to the public, because the public should know how China has formed a lethal partnership with the Mexican cartels, and American citizens are dying at record levels. Unfortunately, nobody's aware of that. It seems to me that the more complex the problem gets, the worse the problem gets, the less people inside and outside the government are talking about it. Politics is driving everything in this country right now, and people are so afraid of the optics on the politics. But in regards to the situation that we're talking about today, this is not a political issue. This has been going on for decades, right? And it's getting worse, right? And it's across the Republican and Democratic administrations. So you would think that the public would be outraged by the violence and the deaths from fentanyl and methamphetamines and other drugs, especially seeing the damage that China has done to our economy and to our country, and to the hundreds of thousands who have died from the COVID virus, right? So we have like a perfect storm brewing, but people are just not talking about it. And it's really disturbing, because we're really facing an unprecedented crisis that we've never seen in the history of this country. And it's going to continue to get worse, right? And by the way, when it comes to the fentanyl crisis, there would be a hell of a lot more people dead if we didn't have Narcan. Thank God for Narcan, saving lives every day. The first responders are out there hitting up overdose victims left and right with Narcan. So the statistics are even a little misleading in that regard, because we have a lot more people that are overdosing from this poisonous stuff coming from labs in China. So Jason, it's a great question. I wish I had a better answer, but I know you and I keep, pushing the messages the best we can. But unfortunately, we need more people. We need more of the public to be outraged and start demanding answers from the government and from the mainstream media. It's just not happening.
Yeah, and hopefully it's going to start, buddy. Derek, as always, man, I appreciate your service and all you do to try to fix this and get the information out to the folks.
Thank you, buddy.
Good seeing you. Be safe.